on the night of April 18th, 1775, two distinguished American patriots, Samuel Adams and John Hancock, had dinner in this very house. And then a little bit later, around midnight, they were interrupted by Paul Revere, who was riding up the street to tell them that the British were coming. That's part of the history of the Hancock-Clark House, now in the possession of the Lexington Historical Society and open to the public for viewing. And we're here today to look at one of their prized possessions, this slant-top desk on frame. And it's even thought that George Washington himself sat at this desk and did some work. But now I'd like to show you how I built this slant-top desk. When it came time to design our desk, I chose a slant front desk. And this is nice because I can close it up when it's not being used to hide anything from public scrutiny. Also, I chose maple, which is a good hard writing surface. And to make the desk elegant, I set it up on its own frame. Now, the frame has 4 tapered legs. And I need to put a mortise in each leg to accept the rails. And I'll do that over here on the drill press. Now, I've set up the drill press with a mortising attachment, which is really just a drill bit that fits inside a square chisel, so that as you pull down on the drill bit, a hole gets drilled and then the chisel will remove the rest of the material. Now, each leg has one straight corner, the outside corner, and then the other sides are slightly tapered. And what you have to remember is that the taper is on the mortise side of the leg. Now, to make the taper, I'm going to use my tapering jig, which is just 2 pieces of wood with a hinge as a pivot. And then back on the other end, there's a little stop to put the wood up against, and an adjustable feature which really gives me an infinite number of tapers. Now, I have to remember that the taper is not going to start right up at the top here. I want it to start about 4.5 inches down so I have a nice square surface for the rails to come into. Well, a little bit of sanding will help smooth up these surfaces and remove any burn marks caused by the ripping operation. The rails all have a tenon on each end which fits into the mortises of the leg. And if you look at the rail from the end, you see that the tenon is perfectly centered. And the first cut that I want to make is this shoulder cut right here. So I've set up a gauge block to give me the correct length of the tenon, and with the blade at the right height, I'm ready to go. With the gauge block in the same position and the blade raised to about 1/2 inch, I'm ready to make this shoulder cut and nibble away the rest of the material. A little yellow carpenter's glue on the tenon. We can assemble one of the corners here, the leg. Now I'll just set it in a pipe clamp and just gently squeeze it together. Now, these holes are for some little dowels which will act as pins just to hold it all together. Well, a couple clamps to hold the side together, and I'm ready to dowel these legs. And you know, the clamps are really only there to hold everything in place while I set the dowel. Well, now I'll just use my belt sander to remove the excess dowel. Well, that takes care of the frame, and now I'm ready to start working on the desk top. And the first thing I want to do is make this pine frame, which not only supports the drawer, but is also part of this slide-out mechanism which holds the writing surface in place. Well, here are the pieces of pine for the frame, and they're just 1 by 3. And the first thing I want to do is put a groove down the inside edge of the two long pieces. And I've set up my table saw with the adjustable dado head cutter to be about 1/4 of an inch wide and 1/2 inch deep. Now the short end pieces have a tenon which fits into that groove, like that. Now I'll make these tenons over on the table saw where I've set up a gauge block and my adjustable dado head cutter. The frame is held together using a little bit of yellow carpenter's glue and some brads to hold the corners. Anyway, this panel cutter sure makes squaring up these big pieces easy. Now this piece of glued up maple, which I've just cut to length, is actually the same size as the pine frame that I made. And that's because it's actually the bottom shelf of the desk compartment. Now I'm ready to cut these side pieces, actually cut the angle on the side pieces, which I'll do over here on the radial arm saw, which is all set up at about a 40¼ degree angle. Didn't quite cut all the way through, so I'll just finish it with my back saw. If I wet this a little bit here, I think I can show you the next feature. The side panels have two dados, one at the top here for the bottom shelf, and one down here for the pine frame. Now the first one I'm going to do is for the shelf, and I've set up the table saw with the adjustable head dado cutter, and I'm ready to go. The next thing to do is to put a dado in this frame, and that'll accept this pine piece which separates the shelf support from the drawer. And I've set up the dado head in the saw, and I'm all ready to go. Now with the desk set on its back, I want to show you another detail. In that separator piece, there's a slot, and that's for a screw to ride in, and that controls the distance that the shelf support comes out. The straight slot is made easily by doing a pass from each side using a 1/4 inch round nose bit. But now that screw has to be recessed so the head doesn't stick up. So I'm going to change to a tapered bit and put a little groove in there to recess that screw head. Now this whole assembly gets set in the groove of the pine frame. First a little glue, and then I'll secure it with some more drywall screws. Okay, that takes care of that subassembly. And now I want to start working on this top shelf. And I'm going to take this glued up blank that I have and put this bevel right here. And that lines up with this side slope. And if you remember, that's 40¼ degrees. And the table saw is all set up to do that. Now I want to just knock off this bottom corner like this. So I'll leave the blade at the same angle, and I've moved the fence just a little bit further away. Now, using one of the actual side pieces as a guide, I'll set the top shelf on it, aligning it with that bevel on the front and flush with the top. and I'll mark the exact width and rip it on the table saw. Well, good morning. I've got started on those rabbets, and this is the back edge of one of the side pieces. And note that I've stopped about 3/8 of an inch short of the top, and that's because I don't want the rabbit to show on the top edge of the desk. Now over here, I've set up my dovetailing jig. And this is the top piece, and this is one of the side pieces. And by following this plastic guide, using my router with a dovetail bit and a little collar, I'll get perfect dovetails every time. We'll assemble this thing and see how it fits. Okay, the bottom shelf. Dado. 2 dados of the other side. Okay, now the top, I'm not going to glue this yet or drive it in all the way. I just want to set it in place to make sure the case is properly aligned. Well, now I'm ready to start working on all these compartments. And these vertical pieces are set into dados at the bottom and at the top, much like these you see on the horizontal pieces. What I've done first is all the layout on the shelf, and using a nice straight edge, which is clamped in place so that the router can ride against it, I'll plow out each groove using a 1/2 inch mortising bit. That's good. Now at the top and bottom of all the vertical pieces, there's this little notch. And that's so I can conceal the end of the dado. And I just nibble those out on the table saw. And now I'm ready for some assembly. where you can never have enough clamps for a project like this. I'm going to let that set for a while the glue cures and turn my attention to this slant top, which is a series of boards glued together with breadboard edges. And these breadboard edges are going to help keep that top nice and flat. And the first thing that I want to do is put a groove in those edge pieces, and to do that I'm going to use my router with a 1/4-inch slot cutter. Okay, now I need to make a tongue on the end of these glued up boards. And I'll do that using the router with the same bit, except I have to adjust my base. Well, now I'm going to have to knock the corners of this tongue off so it'll fit in the groove. And to do that, I'm just going to use a saw and a chisel. Set this aside. And I think the glue is dry enough to take the clamps off this case and start working on the face frame. Well, there's nothing complicated about this little face frame. Just some strips of maple, a narrow piece on the top, a little bit wider one on the bottom, and these little pieces that'll cover the end grain of the separator piece. Now I'm just gluing and nailing these in place. Well, now for the lid support. Because I don't want to see the end grain on these pieces, I'm going to add this little T molding right here on the front of it. I'm going to make that first. Now a groove in the end of the support. This little notch in the support piece will stop against that piece I made earlier. And now I'm going to glue the end pieces on, and I think I better get back to work on that slant top. Now on the inside of my slant top, the top edge and the sides have a rabbet, and it's beveled a little bit so that I don't have a real sharp edge here to lean on. And it also gives me a nice lip to close the top against. I'll make that beveled rabbet using a 22-degree beveling bit. And because I want to remove just a little bit of material at a time, I'll have to make several adjustments. Well, that nice beaded edge will be the finished edge for the top side of the slant top. Now there's some hinges that secure the shelf and the top. And I want to mortise those in, make them flush. So I've made a little jig to guide my router, and the router is equipped with a 1/2-inch mortising bit. Watch. Now with the mortise cut, I've got to square up those little corners. And for that, I'm just going to use a little corner chisel. Now some pilot holes for the screws. And now a piece of 1/4-inch maple plywood, which I'll attach with my brad tacker. I've been making some of the parts for these little drawers. Let me show you how they go together. The sides are dovetailed into the front, just like I did on the top of the case. Then I put a 1/4-inch groove in the sides and the front over on the table saw, and that's for this plywood bottom. Then I put 2 more dados at the back edge on the table saw for the back piece, which fits in like this. I glue and nail these together, and that takes care of the little drawers. Now the large drawer has a rabbeted front on the sides and the top. And I'm ready to do that right over here with my router and a rabbeting bit. So now I just dovetail the sides and the front. Now I'm going to put a decorative edge on all 4 sides of the drawer front using a 1/4-inch round-over bit. Now a little scotia molding to go around the bottom edge, and this piece is ready for some fine sanding and then a coat of finish. Well, after much discussion here in the shop, it was decided that the desk should be stained a silver birch. Now I'm not going to let it sit on there very long. I'm going to put it on with a brush and then rub most of it off with a rag so that I can let the natural beauty of the maple show through. And after this stain dries, I'm going to put 2 coats of a satin finish polyurethane. Well, this project's a challenge. There's no doubt about it. But I hope you'll give it a try.